We are on the chapter Standards of Conduct and Spiritual Freedom. So, Sri Aurobindo makes a classification of the standards of conduct very largely in 4 steps. The first step is the law of the ego and desire. Okay, so the law of the ego, you have to look after your own individuality, and whatever is your need and whatever is your requirements, you have to satisfy them. So, that's an egoistic stage. The second stage is when egoism becomes a little out of control, society steps in. So, it's a social standard, the next one. So, the social standard says you can go thus far and not farther anymore. So, it lays down laws. Okay? The typical social laws are everybody who is capable of paying income tax should pay income tax. Everybody who is traveling on the road should obey the traffic laws. So, these are all the social standards. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. You should not play loud music at midnight and disturb your neighbors. These are all social laws. There is nothing moral about it. The third level is the moral law. The individual feels that there is something which is acceptable at a human level and something which are not acceptable at a human level, and then he imposes his ideas on the rest of society. That's how morality comes in. Morality is a product of the mind, okay, the mind of man. Therefore, since there is no mind in the animal, there is no morality in the animal, but there is morality in man. But it is a mental origination. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then also to be noted, in the second law, it is society that is imposing its laws on the individuals. In the third law, morality, it is the individual who, according to his best lights, okay, he imposes his ideas on society, and society starts accepting them. And the last one is no laws at all. You depend totally on the divine, and he is total freedom. So, there are no laws there at all. Law is opposed to freedom, and you are absolutely free when you surrender to him. So, that's it.
And what stage do these various laws occur? At what stage? At what level? Is it at the ignorance, or is it in the spiritual planes of consciousness?
The ignorance is there right up to the moral level.
Okay.
It even goes into the spiritual level. When you are trying to be a sadhak, okay, you are in ignorance. Only when you go to the spiritual level of consciousness, you escape from your soul or consciousness escapes from the body mind life, that you can say that you are a yogi and not a sadhak. A sadhak is one who is trying to perfect himself, but a yogi is already on the way to perfection. Not perfect perfection, but anyway far superior to the normal human being. Okay, so now I am going to read the para beginning from "in other words." Okay.
Good.
Yeah, it's not a very big para, so we will finish reading it. In other words, there is above society's external law and man's moral law, and beyond them, though feebly and ignorantly aimed at by something within them, a larger truth of a vast unbound consciousness, a law divine towards which both these blind and gross formulations are progressive faltering steps that try to escape from the natural law of the animal to a more exalted light or universal rule. That divine standard, since the Godhead in us is our spirit moving towards its own concealed perfection, must be a supreme spiritual law and truth of our nature. Again, as we are embodied beings in the world with a common existence and nature, and yet individual souls capable of direct touch with the transcendent, This supreme truth of ourselves must have a double character. It must be a law and truth that discovers the perfect movement, harmony, rhythm of a great spiritualized collective life and determines perfectly our relations with each being and all beings in nature's varied oneness. It must be at the same time a law and truth that discovers to us at each moment the rhythm and exact steps of the direct expression of the divine in the soul, mind, life, and body of the individual nature. I'll read the footnote later. And and we find in experience that this supreme light and force of action in its highest expression is at once an imperative law and an absolute freedom. It is an imperative law because it governs by immutable truth our every inner and outer movement. And yet, at each moment and in each movement, the absolute freedom of the Supreme handles the perfect plasticity of our conscious and liberated nature. So, the individual nature, there is a footnote, so I am reading that footnote. Therefore, the Gita defines dharma as an expression which means more than either religion or morality, as action controlled by our essential manner of being, essential manner of self-being. Okay? So that is, I made a note, swabhava.
Yes.
The swabhava is an interesting concept and we should understand that. Okay? That is, what is dharma? Dharma is very often translated as religion and sometimes as duty, but it's not that at all. Dharma is universal. Dharma is coming from the root dhri, to hold. Okay? So, there is a dharma at the physical level, there is a dharma at the animal level, there is a dharma at the human level, there is a dharma at the moral level, and there is a dharma at the spiritual level. So, dharma is not something fixed. It is that law which is applicable to the level at which you are living. That is dharma. Okay? But there is a dharma which is valid for all, and that's a sanatana dharma. Okay? That's a sanatana dharma. There is no change. When you are at one particular level, your dharma can be different from another level. Okay? Just as you are in a society, you are living in a society, you are subject to the laws of society. But when you are in a moral condition, sometimes you can disagree with the society. So you are at a different level. Okay? For instance, in war, a nation goes to war and all the young people have to join the war. That's a law, social law. But you can differ from that and you can say, I am a conscientious objector. I don't want to participate in this war which I consider immoral. So that is, you are defying the social law. So dharma is something that goes on changing with your status of consciousness. So finally, you have the what shall we say, the swabhava. So the swabhava is like this. It's a very interesting concept and one must have a clear idea about it. Swabhava, when the divine creates different souls, the one infinite soul becomes the different many souls in the physical world. Okay? It begins with the divine presence in everything. The divine presence. But that divine presence slowly develops and you get a spiritual, the psychic being. The soul is the divine presence, the potential divine in you. But it is sleeping in the lower levels of consciousness. And when the psychic comes forward, it is the soul that has developed and put on the nature of the divine to a large extent. So when the psychic comes in, it's a soul which has developed into the psychic. And the divine, when he is creating souls, he creates each soul according to a law. Okay? And that is to say, there will be some people who will have knowledge as the law of their being. Some people will have devotion as the law of their being. Okay? Some may have some other. So this is the swabhava. Each soul has got its own swabhava and it has to develop that swabhava. It is meant to that. The coming down into the physical world is to develop that swabhava. And the work that you do in the physical world is the swadharma.
So the divine creates it at birth?
No, not at birth. Outside time and space. Because when the divine is one and he creates the souls, each stone, each atom also has got the divine presence. That is the soul.
No, but when does the divine create the swadharma?
The swabhava is created right at the beginning of creation.
In the beginning of creation, for
Yeah.
every soul.
That's
for every soul and every object.
That's right. Every object has got the divine presence. So the divine presence is the beginning of the soul. Okay? In an animal, you can't say that the divine presence is there, but already you can say that the soul is a potential psychic being. The psychic being is a developed soul. Just like the tree is the soul, and the seed is the soul, and the tree, the developed seed, is a psychic being. So you can put it in that way. Okay, so what is Sri saying here? He is talking about the last law, the divine law. And he is saying something very interesting. He says it's a law as well as total freedom. Law, so far as the divine is concerned, because the divine will move only in the paths of truth. So therefore it's a law. But for us, it is total freedom. Because total truth is, there are no barriers to truth. Okay? So that's why. This is what he is saying. And he is also mentioning something very interesting, and that's worth commenting on. Again, as we are embodied beings in the world with a common existence and nature, and yet individual souls capable of direct touch with transcendent, this supreme truth of ourselves must have a double character. The double character is the individual as well as the collective. Okay? So, Sri Yoga does not recommend only an individual liberation, which was the aim of Indian yoga for a long time. But now Sri is changing the rules of the game. He says that fine, the individual should certainly get liberation. But when the individual is getting liberation, where does that leave the others, the other human beings, of which you are one, you are a part of the collectivity. So why don't you do something for the collectivity? So Sri Yoga goes to individual liberation, yet that individual liberation must help the others also. Therefore, there must be a collective evolutionary step upwards.
Would you say that this is part of Mother's goal for Oroville?
Yes, absolutely. That's why the Oroville experiment is exactly that. A collective raising of the consciousness so that the truth finds it easier to descend into the humanity. In fact, Sri says that very clearly. He says if one individual is liberated, it's fine for him, okay? But it has a certain repercussion in the physical world, and it is not enough for the supermind to descend into the physical world. One man, the supermind will descend into him, or he will go into the supermind, ascent and descent. At the same time, the others are still left high and dry without any effect on that. So it's only when a collectivity becomes supermentalized, then it has the power to spread very much. Okay? It's very much like if I have one stick in the hand, I can break it very easily. But if I have 10 sticks of the same type, it develops a certain strength, and I can't break that very easily. So the number of human beings who are at a higher level, the effect of the descent of consciousness from above can be more effective. That's the whole point.
So I remember Gerard at Oro Orchard told me that he once asked Mother, what is the difference in the ashram and Oroville?
Okay. So,
And Mother answered, the ashram will always be here for those who want to practice the integral yoga.
yes,
And then she said, and Oroville is so wide.
yes. In Auroville, it is much wider, so that when it is wider, naturally the standard drops to a certain extent. It's the same effort being made at a collective level. And Mother said also that the ashram will always remain a pioneer, and Auroville is an experiment in collective living, spiritual living. It has to evolve. It will take time for it to have, but this is the first attempt at a collective living with spiritual rules and regulations. There are many collectivities, all nations are collectivities, but they are attempts, and they are at a pretty, in a certain sense, they are not spiritual. Okay? But Auroville and ashram are efforts at a collective living at a spiritual level. Not a moral level, but at a spiritual level. Okay, so and I'll read the last sentence again in this para. So, and we find in experience that this supreme light and force of action in its highest expression is at once an imperative law and an absolute freedom. So, it sounds contradictory because law and freedom are opposites. Where there is law, you are bound to certain rules and regulations. But when there is freedom, you are not bound at all, you are totally free. But if you see it from another angle, okay, the divine law is that which takes you on the path of truth. So, there is already a restriction from, you are eliminating the untruth. So, that is why it is a law in that sense. Okay? So, the ethical idealist tries to discover this supreme law in his own moral data, in the inferior powers and factors that belong to the mental and ethical formula, and to and to sustain and organize them, he selects a fundamental principle of conduct, essentially unsound and constructed by the intellect, utility, hedonism, reason, intuitive conscience, or any other generalized standard. All such efforts are foredoomed to failure. Our inner nature is the progressive expression of the eternal spirit and too complex a power to be tied down by a single dominant mental or moral principle. Only the supramental consciousness can reveal to its differing and conflicting forces their spiritual truths and harmonize their divergences. So, he is discussing here the third law, the moral law, the ethical idealist, and he is pointing out the defects of that standard. The ethical idealist tries to discover this supreme law in his own moral data, in the inferior powers and factors that belong to the mental and ethical formula. Okay? Truth, justice, kindness, compassion, all these are mental ideals. Okay? So, and ethical formula.
Would they be part of the person's dharma?
The dharma at that level is a moral dharma, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, that was the standard, the dharma, Ramasya dharma was exactly that. Okay? His role in evolution was to establish the moral rule. Shyamsa says that very clearly. Okay? His role in evolution was to establish the moral rule. That's why he is an avatar. Okay. And to sustain and organize them, he selects a fundamental principle of conduct essentially unsound, we will see why, and constructed by the intellect. Utility, hedonism, reason, intuitive conscience, or any other generalized standard. Now, utility is very interesting concept. Okay, there was a Roger Bentham, I think. I forget the name, but his idea was what is good for society. So his definition was that which is useful is good. The whole utilitarian philosophy is based on that. That which is good, that which is useful is good. That which is useless you throw away, not necessary. That's a utility. Utilitarianism is the philosophy that he expounded. Then there is hedonism. There is another idea. Hedonism also can be also called Epicureanism. Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, 300 BC, in which he said that the aim of life is ananda, pleasure. Okay, so that which is pleasant is a good. That was another definition. But obviously, these are all very limited concepts, and something which is very useful to one need not be useful to another. So that is obviously, it lasts for a very short time. It doesn't last for long. Okay, and the idea of hedonism also can be very wrong, because pleasure can be very fleeting, and we also know that in spiritual life, that which is pleasant is not necessarily good for the soul. It may be good for the body-mind life, but it may not be good for the soul. In fact, for the good of the soul can include also very unpleasant experiences. The unpleasant experience is that which goads the soul towards perfection. So, difficulties, obstacles, and unpleasant experiences are very, very valuable experiences, very valuable conditions for the soul. So, it is different. Okay. Then there is reason. The materialist says reason is the standard. That which is reasonable is the good. Okay. Then there is intuitive conscience and other generalized standards. But all these, because they are temporary, all such efforts are foredoomed to failure. They will last for a short time and mankind will reject them. Our inner nature is the progressive expression of the eternal spirit, and too complex a power to be tied down by a single dominant mental and moral principle. So these are all mental ideas which don't last for too long. Okay? So we have to go by rules which are from the self or the psychic being. That is the ultimate, not the mental rules. Only the supramental consciousness can reveal to its differing and conflicting forces their spiritual truth and harmonize their divergences. Even in spiritual life, there are standards and there are differences of opinion. So Srila says the ultimate rule of life will be when it is supramental. The supramental will tell you the right way of life, okay, and the right way of living. So now Srila discusses religion. He discusses later religions and in next paragraph he discusses the older religions. Okay. So maybe these two paras we can do today. Okay. I'll read the next one. The later religions endeavor to fix the type of a supreme truth of conduct, erect a system, and declare God's law through the mouth of avatar or prophet. These systems, more powerful and dynamic than the dry ethical ideal, are yet for the most part no more than idealistic glorifications of the moral principle sanctified by religious emotion and the label of a superhuman origin. Some, like the extreme Christian ethic, are rejected by nature because they insist unworkably on an impractical absolute rule. Others prove in the end to be evolutionary compromises and become obsolete in the march of time. The true divine law, unlike these mental counterfeits, cannot be a system of rigid ethical determinations that press into their cast iron molds all our life movements. The law divine is truth of life and truth of the spirit, and must take up with a free living plasticity and inspire with the direct touch of its eternal light each step of our action and all the complexities of our life issues. It must act not as a rule and formula, but as an enveloping and penetrating conscious presence that determines all our thoughts, activities, feelings, impulsions of will by its infallible power and knowledge. So what are these later religions? Okay, so later religions are Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and all these other things. Okay, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, these are all the later religions. Because the earlier religions were, he will list them afterwards, okay, Confucius, Manu, and others. So, what about these later religions? They are a halfway house between true spiritual life and the moral code. Okay, they are a halfway house. The later religions endeavor to fix the type of a supreme truth of conduct, erect a system, and declare God's law through the mouth of avatar or prophet. Some they use the word avatar. In Christianity, they don't use the word avatar, but they go through the mouth of Christ, okay, whatever he taught, or prophet. Prophet is in Islam. In Islam, you have the concept also in Christianity that man cannot become divine, but he can have a relation with the divine. Okay, so that's why in Islam, he is not even an avatar. Okay, he is a prophet. He is a messenger of God, and Christ himself. Okay, I and my Father are one, he declared. No? So, therefore, it is very clear that he did consider himself as an avatar. The concept of avatarhood is not there in Christianity, but is very much there in the Indian system, the avatar. Human beings are essentially divine, and therefore their consciousness can merge and identify with the divine. The body, mind, life may not be there, but certainly the mind can identify with the divine. The vital also can do that, and in a future date when the supramental race comes, even the body will be divine. So, now I read the next sentence. These systems, more powerful and dynamic than the dry ethical idea, are yet for the most part no more than idealistic glorifications of the moral principle sanctioned by religious emotion and the label of a superhuman origin. Most of these religions they start from a certain person, a person who is the origin of the teachings. Okay? In Christianity it is Christ, in Islam it is Muhammad. Okay? In other religions also, there is one person who starts a process. Okay? In Jainism we have also the Tirthankaras. There are 20 Tirthankaras, and in Sikhism also they have many gurus. They are all coming from but they are supra-human origin, but coming from a human level. Okay. Some, like the extreme Christian ethic, are rejected by nature because they insist unworkably on an impractical absolute rule. So they will give examples and we will discuss this in detail, because if you say we want absolute truth and we want absolute justice, it cannot happen in the physical world, because the physical world is imperfect. It can happen only at a higher level where perfection is possible. So it's unworkable and it never works fully. You want perfect justice, that also cannot come in the physical world. He'll discuss that later in detail. Okay. Others prove in the end to be evolutionary compromises and become obsolete in the march of time. So, a day may come when most of these religions will disappear and be replaced by a true spiritual life. Okay, because obviously there are defects in these systems, and these defects, when mankind awakes to these defects, religion will lose its force. It may still exist in for some individuals, but largely it will not have the same impact as it is today. Religions are the source of much conflict. Okay, we know that. In Islam it's very obvious, and in Christianity also in the earlier periods there was a lot of conflict. The Crusades, they imposed Christianity on others through war. Okay, so,
And the Inquisition.
yeah, that's right. The true divine law, unlike these mental counterfeits, the word counterfeit is very interesting. Okay, so it's false. Okay, mental counterfeits cannot be a system of rigid ethical determinations that press into their cast iron molds all our life movements. All religions tell you very clearly, this you cannot do, this you have to do. So, obviously, when you say you cannot do this, you are laying limits to, and it's valid at the moral level. It's valid when you are developing. But at the highest level, it is not so. Because very often what you think is truth is not as true as you think it is. Okay? Your sense of justice is not really that at all. Sometimes it becomes injustice. Okay? The law divine is truth of life and truth of the spirit, and must take up with a free living plasticity and inspire with the direct touch of his eternal light each step of our action and all the complexities of our life issues. Okay? So, he has only given us he has told in very general terms, but he will explain how it happens later on. He will explain to us how morality with its fixed ideas is not valid. He will explain later on in many different ways. Okay. Then it must act not as a rule and formula, but as an enveloping and penetrating conscious presence. Now note the word enveloping. It includes everything. It includes all the dualities also. Okay, and penetrating. Go deep into something. Don't be on the superficial level. Okay, that determines all our thoughts, activities, and feelings, impulsions of will by its infallible power and knowledge. So, this is why he discussed about the later religions, mainly Christianity, Islam, and all the other religions. Okay, so, not the beginning, but towards in the Middle Ages, 2000 years, maybe a little more, a little less. Okay. Then the older religions. He is now talking about the older religions. The older religions erected their rule of the wise, their dicta of Manu or Confucius, okay, a complex shastra in which they attempted to combine the social rule and moral law with the declaration of certain eternal principles of our highest nature in some kind of uniting amalgam. All three, which are the three? Manu, Manusmriti, Confucius, and a complex Shastra. These three. All three were treated on the same ground as equally the expression of the everlasting verities, Sanatana Dharma. Everlasting verities. They are true for all time and in every country. But two of the elements are evolutionary and valid for a time. Mental constructions, human readings of the will of the eternal. The third, attached and subdued to certain social and moral formulas, had to share the fortunes of its form, the form in which it was expressed. Okay? Either the Shastra grows obsolete and has to be progressively changed or finally cast away, or else it stands as a rigid barrier to the self-development of the individual and the race. The Shastra erects a collective and external standard. It ignores the inner nature of the individual, the indeterminable elements of a secret spiritual force within him. But the nature of the individual will not be ignored. Its demand is inexorable. The unrestrained indulgence of his outer impulses leads to anarchy and dissolution, but the suppression and coercion of his soul's freedom by fixed and mechanical rule spells stagnation or an inner death. Okay. Not this coercion or determination from outside, but the free discovery of his highest spirit and the truth of an eternal movement is the supreme thing that he has to discover. He has discussed the Manusmriti and the Confucius. I don't know what his teaching was, okay, whether it had a name, Confucius, in China. Okay? I'm not sure. Then a complex Shastra. The Shastras are all, in India we have all the Shastras, the written down rules of spiritual life, but they are very rigid and they don't cater to the demands of every individual. That's why in India, where the Shastra has got a very specific function, but it's not the ultimate truth. I give you 2-3 examples. Okay, there was the Vedanta is a Shastra. Okay, the Gita is a Shastra. Okay, so there are so many things. So once what happened was, in one of the talks, Ramakrishna was there, and what he was saying, there was someone who challenged him and said, but this is not Vedantic teaching that you are giving. Okay? So he replied, I spit upon your Vedanta. So I spit, not I spit upon your Vedanta. My truth is, I have experienced it. So that's the whole thing. Okay? Even Sri Aurobindo goes beyond the Gita. Okay? So this is one example of the Shastra being rigid. Then there is the other example also of the Vivekananda. In Vivekananda's case, he was when Ramakrishna passed away, he started traveling all over India, barefoot, without any money, nothing. Okay, but he was such a personality. Wherever he went, he was received with great respect and honor. And once he was in Madras, now called Chennai, he was there and he was discussing certain things. Okay, and one of the audience rose up and said that what you are saying is not true of the Shastras. So he said, the Shastra does not say that. So Vivekananda replied, but I, Vivekananda, say it. He insisted. And Sri Aurobindo says that this expression is not egoism. It is the confident statement of a warrior of truth. Okay? So he stands for the truth that he has experienced. Okay? So these are the 3 laws that he is discussing. Manusmriti, and in fact there is a text in Tamil Nadu, okay, Tirukkural. It is semi-moral and semi-social. What you should do in society. It's the second standard of conduct and the third standard of conduct, but not spiritual. Okay? So these are the older religions. So the higher ethical law is discovered by the individual in his mind and will and psychic sense, and then extended to the race. Okay. The supreme law also must be discovered by the individual in his spirit. Then only through a spiritual influence and not by the mental idea can it be extended to others. A moral law can be imposed as a rule or an ideal on numbers of men who have not attained that level of consciousness or that fineness of mind and will and psychic sense in which it can become a reality to them and a living force. As an ideal, it can be revered, without any need of practice. As a rule, it can be observed in its outsides, even if the inner sense is missed altogether. The supramental and spiritual life cannot be mechanized in this way. It cannot be turned into a mental ideal or an external rule. It has its own great lines, but these must be made real, must be the workings of an active power felt in the individual's consciousness and the transcriptions of an eternal truth powerful to transform mind, life, and body. And because it is thus real, effective, imperative, the generalization of the supramental consciousness and the spiritual life is the sole force that can lead to individual and collective perfection in Earth's highest creatures. Only by our coming into constant contact with the divine consciousness and its absolute truth can some form of the divine consciousness, the dynamic absolute, take up our earth existence and transform its strife, stumbling, sufferings, and falsities into an image of the supreme light, power, and ananda. The culmination of the soul's constant search with the Supreme is that self-giving which we call surrender to the divine will and emergence of the separated ego in the one who is all. A vast universality of soul, an intense unity with all is the basis, is the base and fixed condition of the supramental consciousness and spiritual life. In that universality and unity alone can we find the supreme law of the divine manifestation in the life of the embodied spirit. In that alone can we discover the supreme motion and right play of our individual nature. In that alone can all these lower discords resolve themselves into a victorious harmony of the true relations between manifested beings who are portions of the one Godhead and children of one universal mother. Okay? So, 3 times he has repeated in that alone. Okay? It's a supermind that will be the last standard, and all the other standards will be perfectly comprehensible, intelligible when you reach that standard. That's what he's saying. So, these 2 paras we'll do next time in detail.